Rania, Omar, thank you so much for coming in today. After the recent attack on the Druze community, many people have been asking, who are the Druze? And why do they continue to be cannon fodder oftentimes in these wars in the Middle East? And so I thought it'd be really interesting and pretty much kismet that I've become friends with your family, and I've become friends with your family, and being able to bring you in to really talk about the history of your people and your existence in the Middle East will be very helpful for many who are asking a lot of very important questions about what is going on. And so I just want to start by saying deepest condolences on what has happened and what is continuing to happen, sadly. And, I know we cried together on Saturday, and, today we wake up a little stronger with a stronger voice so that the rest of the world can hear a very important story about a very small community. So, Rania, why don't we start with you? Where were you born? Where were you raised? Who are you?
So I was born in Israel in a small town called Maghar. It's in the northern part of Israel. And then a few years later, my family moved to Dalat el-Kamel. It's another Druze town near Haifa. And 11 years ago, I moved here to the USA.
And Omar, you are Druze as well, but you come from an entire different background because your family is not Druze from Israel. Y'all are Druze from Syria or Lebanon. Maybe you can describe to us, what does that mean?
Yes. So my great-grandfather came here to the U.S. in the late 1800s from what was then the Ottoman Empire. Today it's Mount Lebanon. But my family had been in that part of the world for about 800 years. So we have our roots in the mountains of Lebanon, and we come from probably the same group of tribes.
We share the same last name.
Oh, it's incredible because I know I introduced the two of you, and so it takes PragerU to find two Druze in Los Angeles that meet. But I guess given that your community is so small, it's likely that you're all somewhat related. There are less than 1 million Druze in the world.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Right.
Yep.
Omar, when did your family come to the United States and why?
Well, my great-grandfather came here in late 19th century. I think there were two reasons for economic opportunity, but also for a life in a free world. And there was a degree of tyranny in Lebanon at the time with the Ottoman Empire. Even during its late stages, it was very difficult for an aspiring young Druze man to rise to his God-given potential. And so he read. My father would tell me stories about how he was inspired by the example of Abraham Lincoln and the founding fathers. And so it was something beyond just, coming out for opportunity. He could have gone to many other places, but he decided to be in the U.S. for that reason.
I mean, certainly at that time, it wasn't that comfortable or convenient to come to the U.S.
42 days working passage. Yep. He was listed as a peddler on the ship Manifest, and he was the only person of Arabian descent. Everybody else was from Scotland or Germany. And I think he was the first recorded immigrant from the Druze community, maybe even from the Lebanese community at the time.
Wow. So, and even though your family has been here in the United States, you still identify as Druze? You still have the Druze religion in your household?
That's correct. Yes. Yes. Full 100% American, but I'm also an adherent of the Druze faith, which does not contradict much of what this country is founded upon, and also does not contradict much of what the Judeo-Christian tradition is founded upon.
And have you gone back and forth to either Syria or Lebanon to visit with the Druze community?
Yes, this is kind of part of a journey of self-discovery. About 15 years ago, I went to the Druze communities in Syria, southern Syria, where I have some extended family, but also to the north of Syria, where there are 15 or 16 Druze villages that have persisted for 1,000 years. That just fascinated me, how a small minority could persist for that type of time frame under all sorts of pressures, from the Ayyubids to the Mamluks to the Crusaders to the Byzantines to the Ottomans. It was just fascinating to meet the descendants of those survivors. And I think the Druze community throughout that part of the world has learned to survive and managed to practice its faith to some degree, with varying degrees of openness and secrecy, depending on the environment around them.
How did they accept you in these Druze communities when you came in and said, I'm Druze, I live in the United States?
I guess the best example would be if you're part of a frat or an alumni club, but it was, and I can say this because having just met Rania, it's as if, because we believe in reincarnation, it's as if we shared this common heritage, and as if we went through common experiences over the generations leading up to this one. So I was asked if, and I was with a friend from here in Southern California, and they were, wondering what these two guys speaking broken Arabic were doing in the north of Syria, and we told them the truth. But then they wanted to verify if we were Druze, and we mentioned something from the history, and they knew that we were Druze, and they took us on a tour of the villages, and they mentioned to us that in 1,000 years, the village had only moved 100 meters, which is basically, we've been there, and everyone has stood their ground. No matter who was conquering the area, we stood our ground, and I thought that was a really interesting part of our heritage.
Yeah, resilient people. So Rania, you had a different experience because you actually grew up in a Druze town, in a Druze community. So maybe you can just describe to us a little bit, what is it like to be Druze? What do you believe in? By the way, it sounds like Jews, but it's not Jews, it's Druze.
Right, it rhymes.
And you speak Arabic, but you're not Muslim. Is that right?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. So explain to us a little bit about this community.
So, Marissa, I was born in Israel. I was born with this mixed identity between being Israeli and Druze, and it was always together, bonded together. I didn't differentiate. And but inside the community, we were practicing our Druze belief, our Druze culture, and life. So, our religion is secret. You have to understand, I'm not religious, so I'm not allowed to be exposed to the secretive part of the religion, not even all of the religious people. Some religious people are exposed to only what we call the barani, which is the cover of the religion. And some people which they are a very small minority, are exposed to what is called the core of the religion. And these are the really acknowledged, like people who really know all the secrets of the religion. But as a Druze, I always been taught that despite the fact that our Druze is secret, our Druze religion is secret, I have always to follow the Druze path. I have to be loyal to my community. I can't marry outside of the community. I have to protect my brothers and sisters no matter where they are in the world. We have a reincarnation, so we are reborn at each other's home, so we are all brothers and sisters somehow. This belief and this bond that connects us as a community makes us feel a kind of responsibility towards each other. And also we are taught that we are loyal to the country that we were born in. So I'm a Druze, I'm Israeli, so my loyalty is to Israel. The Lebanese Druze, his loyalty is to Lebanon, and we respect that. This doesn't contradict the fact that we are brothers and sisters. It's the opposite. We respect them, they respect us. And this is how I grew up in Israel.
So the Druze community in Israel will serve in the Israeli military and identify as Israelis true and through. A Druze who was born in Lebanon would serve in the Lebanese military, and so you could potentially be fighting against your cousins.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yes,
wow.
It happened many times.
And yep.
And so as part of your religion, you don't have aspirations to take over land. You have aspirations to basically self-preserve. Is that right?
It's self-preserve and to get integrated in the place you live in, to respect its values and its culture. to not contradict this culture and values.
Well, integrated somewhat, because you're not supposed to marry into other religions, right?
No.
Your families
Yes.
would want you to marry
Yes.
with Druze. I think when I think of the Druze, I think of it as the most progressive religion,
Right.
while it's the most conservative religion at the same time. And so it's progressive in that you kind of let live, right? If so, any other religion is fine. If you're a Muslim and you accept Muhammad, and you're Druze, you accept Muhammad. For people, it's fine, right? If you're a Druze in Israel and there are Jews around you, you're not feeling like you need to convert any of the Jews. And so that's actually quite progressive in that
Very,
way, right?
very.
You don't like instill or enforce your beliefs on others, yet it's very conservative, where it's kind of insular, and you're supposed to dress conservatively, you're supposed to, or modestly, I would say, you are not supposed to marry outside the faith. And what's so interesting about it is that you mentioned that it's the secretive religion, because when I think about, those of us who are Christian or Jews, we want to take our kids to Sunday school or Saturday school and teach them about everything about our religion, so they know everything, so they can preserve it for the next generation. But when I speak to you as Druze and I ask, well, what do you believe and why is this? It's not necessarily that you're keeping it as a secret. You yourselves have not been taught about all the details of your religion. Is that right?
That's right. It's not, we have to understand there is a reason why it's secret. We've been followed and massacred and oppressed for so many years. That's why we came into conclusion that we should keep our religion secret in order to survive. We are less than 1 million in the whole world. So in order for this small minority to survive all of this oppression, and let's be clear, we live in most of the Druze community lives in the most oppressive region in the world for minorities. And this is the Middle East, of course. I'm not talking about Israel. Let me be clear about that. For that, and for so many years of Ottoman Empire and everyone there who didn't rule there, for all of these years, we had to hide our identity in order to survive. So it's a survival mechanism, let's say.
Where would you say today is the safest place in the Middle East for Druze, and where would you say today is the least safe place in the Middle East?
For me, it was always been Israel, of course.
Israel is the safest?
This is my opinion as an Israeli. This is my experience as an Israeli. I've never had to hide my identity behind any other titles. The only reason that I still hide my identity is to protect our brothers and sisters in other countries, that they can't really freely say who they are. And I'm here talking about myself from my experience. I'm not talking about anyone else. Maybe Omar knows more than me. Maybe he has another opinion.
I think generally over the last maybe 50 to 100 years, Lebanon has been relative. I mean, you can be Druze and say that you're Druze and not be persecuted, maybe to a lesser degree in Syria.
Right.
Other countries in the Middle East, I know from my wife was in Saudi Arabia, kept it on the DL. But really, there's, think of it like the Druze faith as a collection of pearls of wisdom from other traditions, including traditions as far as the Hindu one,
wow.
In terms of reincarnation, to the Greeks. I mean, one of our greatest luminaries is Pythagoras, at the same level as Moses and Christ and Noah. These things aren't things that we necessarily we shouldn't be embarrassed by any of this. These are pearls that we'd love to share with the world, because it's a celebration of all of the wonderful contributions of this sequence of civilizations. But I suppose that tyrannical regimes have created a sense of PTSD. I think the Ottomans had something to do with it. Some of the previous empires cracked down on the Druze presence in the Levant, and it was difficult for us to really propagate what we thought and believed in. But I think that we're probably as free to share some of our beliefs now as we ever have been. And so I think it's a good thing that you're able to share what you know. Some of the things that Rania mentioned were only available to the religious order, we'll never know unless we're part of that. So, but on a basic level, I think it's a beautiful philosophy. And if you read Plato, you're already learning a bit about the Druze.
Wow. It's like you're the vault of the Levant in some ways, right? You've just preserved all of this incredible knowledge of the different groups that I guess have come through that area. I want to talk a little bit about Egypt, because I know that the Druze religion started in Egypt. Are there any I don't know really that much, but I've heard that it started in Egypt, or at one point in time, many of you were in Egypt and no longer. Are there any Druze left in Egypt?
So Egypt is where the gathering of the greatest scholars of that region happened.
Okay.
That is when the faith was formulated and disseminated throughout the world, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, many other parts of the world. And it was under the reign of Al-Hakim, who was a Fatimid leader, who was the sixth leader in the Fatimid Empire. And what distinguished his rule was that he was open to the world's wisdom and was open to new interpretations and esoteric interpretations of not only mainstream Islam, but also compiling the wisdom that led up to that point. And it was a series of letters or epistles that were sent out. And the faith found its many adherents in the Eastern Mediterranean from our ancestors 1,000 years ago.
So why did the Druze community leave Egypt if there were so many of them there? And it doesn't sound like they were necessarily against Islam, right? So it wasn't necessarily that the Druze religion was in direct conflict with Islam. Why didn't they stay in Egypt?
From what I understand is that the successor to Al-Hakim cracked down on the adherents of the Druze faith that following generation, and to the extent that there might have been Druze in Egypt, I don't think there's any presence of Druze in Egypt, maybe today as expats.
There is no presence whatsoever.
There are no Druze in Egypt anymore. Yeah. If there are, they're in secret.
Yeah. Well, I'm aware of the whole story, but it's a long story. I'm not going to start it now. But from what I know, that we call it the exposure era, which means that we believe that we were before that period of time, but we were exposed back then in Egypt because there was the Muslim Caliphate Hakim Ba'amrillah, which traveled to Greece and to India and was so fascinated about their culture, and he wanted to convert all Muslims into this into something new that has new fundamentals, let's say.
So there was an element of trying to get other people into the faith at that point.
This is according to our oral tradition that we were before Islam. We were descendants of Jethro, which is the father-in-law of Moses. And in Egypt, he had that caliphate, he had two advisors, one called Hamza bin Ali and one called Nashtakin Darazi. And then these advisors, when they heard him telling that about his new, passion, they told him that there is a group of people that they worship something simple, spiritual, something that aligns with his beliefs. And he took this mission to explore this new group and to turn and convert all Muslims into this new religion. That was Hakim Ba'amrillah, according to Muslim history books. Because I'm not allowed to speak anything about my religion. All of what I'm saying is in the history books of the Muslim history. So according to Muslim history books, this man either died or disappeared, and then his son replaced him. His name is Zahir, and he was totally against all of what his dad has previously initiated, and he wanted to reconvert them back to Islam. He killed all of the new believers. He massacred them, and some of them flew Egypt. And the history books say that they had a battle in one of the Mediterranean islands with the same person that helped with this new religion. His name is Nashtakin Darazi, and they killed him there. So when they killed him there, people start calling them Druze. That's why Druze is a nickname. We don't like this name. Yes, you know that
That's
story?
True. Yes.
Yeah. This is not, that's why I said it rhymes with Jews, because I know that Even Jewish people don't like anyone to call them Jews. Am I right?
I mean,
Kinda.
we deal with worse things than name calling. Let's just say
So
that.
same with us.
The official name is Muwahidun, which is the believers in one God, the
Wow.
monotheists.
Yes.
The calling that you speak of was open only from the year 1017 to 1043, so it was only a brief 26-year period, and then the calling closed. So anyone who at the time adhered to the philosophy upon their soul, which transmigrated from generation to generation, that was their kind of opportunity. And the community that we're from in the Eastern Mediterranean, they were present in that part of the world. They didn't migrate from Egypt. They were descendants of the Tanukh tribe. There's many Arab tribes and Assyrian, Kurdish, other tribes that embraced the faith and stayed in that region. Some of them weren't actually Muslim. There were some Orthodox Christian tribes that became Druze. For a period of time, they might have converted to Sunni Islam or Shiite Islam because of taxation and pressures to do so. But that's some of the history. There's not very much of a rich record. I wish it was richer to look at, because it's a very important part of the world.
So for a short period of time, people could convert into becoming Druze.
Up until 1043.
But then afterwards, so today, if I'm inspired by Druze traditions, I can't go and convert.
No.
And what if a Druze woman, let's say, and a non-Druze man fall in love and want to get married? Will their children be Druze? Can they raise their kids Druze?
So, like you said earlier, it's the most progressive, but also the most very, very conservative religion. Those boundaries were set a long time ago, and it is what it is. That's just
so. In order to be Druze, both parents have to be Druze.
Exactly. According to our religion, as you said, it's very conservative, but also very progressive. And I have to tell you that according to the religion, there is total equality between women and men. There's no difference. Women can divorce, women can inherit 50-50. So they also, if you are married with non-Druze, doesn't matter if you are a man or a woman, you become non-Druze.
Well, the rights of women probably depend, I'm assuming, on where the Druze are living. So
according to the religion, no. According to our religion, it's equal, 100% equality.
Incredible.
Now, are we really practicing our religion 100%? No, because as we said, we are for so many years under other oppressive rulers. During the Ottoman Empire, I have also to mention that we were forced to pay tax only because we weren't Muslims. It was called jizya. That's when some of the Druze people were forced to hide their belief because they were poor, they were farmers, they didn't have this money to pay this amount of tax. And that was only one sign of many of the oppressive life that we lived as a small minority in that area.
So just to fully understand, to whatever way you can, the Druze religion, do you accept the Old Testament? Do you accept the New Testament? Do you accept the Quran? And then do you believe in it, or is it just acceptable to you? I mean, this is that progressive side of the religion that I just kind of want to get a sense of. You're monotheistic, clearly.
Well, again, our religion is secret. Yeah. I don't know. Honestly, I can't tell you what are the details of the religion. Even if I know, I can't, because I respect my religious leaders who say it's secret. But from what I can tell you, we acknowledge all religions because we don't force our religion to no one, and we respect all other religions. We believe that everyone, no matter what he worships, deserves to be free on his belief. But we also ask people to give us this freedom as well.
Do you believe in any book? I mean, would you have, let's say, the Old Testament in your house or the New Testament in your house? Is it allowed?
All of them.
All of them. I was like, you're so progressive.
Yeah, attendance in church and if we're invited, there's nothing that we could hear in a church session that would give us the reason to, storm out. There's compatibility with the monotheistic traditions, and Christ himself is exalted to the highest levels. I'm also not, I'm not able to speak because I also don't know. But the basics are in line with the traditions that you've brought up, and we can walk and interface with any of the other minorities in that region and not feel like we're putting anybody off.
By the way, I hope that you don't feel like I'm being so intrusive or anything. I'm just really curious, and I realize that can get me into trouble. But, I obviously respect anything that you're allowed to say. I don't want you to break any rules. So what about Jethro? And so I know in Israel, Israelis are taught that the Druze are descendants of Jethro, which is from the Old Testament. Maybe you can explain a little bit of that.
So the way I grew up, according to our oral tradition, we are the descendants of Jethro, which was the father-in-law of Moses. And that's what I told you before, that we existed in Egypt because we were this spiritual belief, the monotheist belief, that we were since Jethro's times. And we still have the Jethro's temple in Chittim, near the Kinneret. So we still go there every year on April 25th, which is just a date that we set to do the Aliyah to our temple.
Do Druze from other countries know about this?
They do. We're aware of the holy shrines in the different parts of the Middle East, and where possible, pilgrimages happen. And I know that that's the case with Christians from Lebanon who go to Jerusalem, and the same thing happens with the sheikhs from the mountains of Lebanon or Syria. They're able from time to time to visit those shrines.
I want to talk a little bit about the attack on the Druze communities in the Middle East. And the reason I think it's very significant is because there are not many of you. There are less than a million of you all over the world. And so when 200 people are killed, that's a very significant portion of your people. If 1 million people are killed, if 1 million Druze are killed, there will be no more Druze. And the way that your religion functions, it's not one that evangelizes people or really focuses on growing. And so really every Druze life matters, and every life matters always. But this is an existential issue for your community because you don't reproduce that fast, you don't evangelize, and you're constantly in the center of these conflicts where you're being attacked. It is a very significant thing when you're talking about such a small minority. And, people oftentimes give the voice to the majority because they'll know someone. And so it's much easier to give a voice to an audience that is likely going to be sympathetic to you. But it's important to me specifically to give a voice to a minority that generally doesn't have an audience because of the few that are Druze and the fact that, it is important that you are the vault of that area of the world. And so why don't we just go through some of the instances that I think the media has almost ignored in the Middle East and the attacks in those areas. Rania, I remember that during the war in Syria, there were several attacks on communities there. So maybe you can just brief us on some of those horrible attacks.
First, since 2015, it's constant attack against the Druze minority from both ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra, which is ISIS, and now Assad and Iran. They also have a huge battle in Suwaida with the Druze community. Just to mention, in 2015, they kidnapped 40 women with 16 children, and they killed more than 260 Druze people for no reason, only because they are Druze. So for them, they are infidels, and they killed them. It's not the only incident. There are other incidents in 2018 in Shabki, in Khadr. so many villages of the Druze community in Sweden and Syria were attacked. People were murdered. They murdered their leaders. They murdered kids, women. They didn't differentiate. And I know that also you know about northern Syria, the villages there. What happened?
Those villages that I mentioned that had been there all those years, in January of 2011 when I visited, it was a matter of 6 or 7 weeks before the Syrian civil war broke out. The women and children went to Sueda, and the men were either conscripted into the army or had to flee to Turkey or other parts, and some ended up defending the village, but under the cloak of taking on Islam from just to protect themselves and to protect the villages. So these are the sort of things that aren't new. We've had to wear the cloak of the majority around us to kind of live to fight another day, and that's what happened in the north of Syria.
What is the answer to the question of, if the Druze are no harm to anybody in Syria or Lebanon, right? You guys are not trying to evangelize. You're not trying to turn Muslims into non-Muslims. Why are the Druze being attacked? I can't remember the name of this subsidiary of ISIS that has attacked your people in Syria. Why are they attacking the Druze? Why did they kidnap these women and children? This is less than 10 years ago. What is the answer to that? Why?
I think we represent an independent spirit, an independent way of thinking that's refreshing to the free world, but not so refreshing to tyrannical regimes. And when they see that there's an independent community that's standing in the way of them consolidating power, then it's seen as a threat that needs to be eliminated. We're not out there, like you said, we're not out there, proselytizing and trying to convert, people. It's sort of that window took place, and we just want to live and let live. I don't understand it. There's no reason for it. Throughout the centuries, we never had aspirations to take over the Middle East. But during those brief periods of time where the Druze had some influence and governed the mountains of Lebanon, in certain cases, Beirut, and some neighboring regions, there was prosperity, there was coexistence. In fact, the idea of modern Lebanon originated because of a Druze prince who introduced Christian minorities into the mountains of Lebanon and collaborated to develop the region. The mountains, if you ever were to visit or look at photos, all the terraces on the hillsides, those were co-developed by many communities that came to the Shuf and the neighboring areas because of the idea that we can live together in peace and prosperity. That's really, if the Druze were given a chance, that's the kind of world they'd like to live in. And so it's sad that those opportunities weren't many over the last 1,000 years. But when you look at the few examples when the Druze had it kind of the way they wished it were to be, it was a beautiful era. 16th century Lebanon is, to this day, a period of time that the Lebanese draw inspiration from. And I think if there's anything to look forward to, it'd be something like that going forward, where we can visit each other and not have to, be in West LA.
Well, I know it's difficult enough with a small community to even date or marry, right, when there are not that many people. But the fact that you can't necessarily, as an Israeli, can you go to Syria?
No.
You can't.
I'm Israeli.
You wouldn't be safe there. Right.
No, I can't. It's not allowed for me because I'm an Israeli. Doesn't matter.
So as an Israeli Druze.
As an Israeli, you can't visit Arab countries because there is no peace agreement between us. So as an Israeli, my passport doesn't allow me to go into Lebanon or Syria. It's not only this. Even if you are Druze that are not Israeli and you happen to live in Europe or the USA and you happen to visit Israel, it's a big issue. You can't go to Lebanon without investigation and sometimes jail. So it's a very risky thing being an Israeli.
So I would just say that anybody that is complaining about not being able to get married and find their other half in this era should look at the Druze and realize how much harder it is
Exactly.
to do it with you guys.
100%.
I feel like we'd be remiss to not mention that there was a leader of the Druze in Syria who was assassinated in 2015. And I'd really like to get a sense from your perspective if you know why that happened and what has led to that.
From what I know, his name was Wahid al-Balous. He was a big leader there for the since ISIS came into Lebanon. And back then, he was fighting ISIS in Jabhat al-Nusra. And I know that that's why this is when they kidnapped and killed many Druze people.
And so that is related to that incident that you said that many of the smaller communities had to consolidate and move because it became so dangerous over there.
That's correct.
That's in 2000. Oh, I know another one in 2021 in northern Syria. They forced one Druze village and one Christian village to convert.
To what? To Islam?
Yes, they consider them infidels. Now, they didn't have any power anymore because, they are not supported by any international community. And I know that many of them had to convert. Many of them were killed. And so many of them also had to move from northern Syria to Sweden, where Druze have some kind of power still.
Do you have a sense of how many Druze were killed in Syria or in Lebanon or any of those areas? Is it
no statistics,
large numbers?
But there are hundreds, if not thousands.
Thousands of Druze were killed. It's really difficult to digest this because I feel like the community, I'd say the West doesn't hear about these issues. It's like we're so blinded. It's like, you people are not invisible. You should not be invisible. And there is an invisibility to the Druze community as if you're just, certain people should just be cannon fodder because there is an expectation that radical Islamists kill people.
Right. It's not only the Druze people in the Middle East that are tortured and massacred, the Yazidis, the old minorities. But we as a minority that has no backup, we don't have any big entity behind us. We don't have the Vatican or the cabinet. We don't have anyone. So our issues are not really treated well. And let's not also forget that we are divided between 3 or 4 countries that don't have peace with each other. So our problems are always within the community or within this umbrella of which called country. We can't take it outside of the community to the international media. And we know how the media treat these incidents. There is bias. So it's very hard to expose our issue.
Well, we're here also because of the horrific incident that happened in northern Israel. And so maybe you can just describe to me a little bit the town and what happened there from your perspective as Druze.
It was devastating. You see the children were, despite all of the tension over the last 9 or 10 months, they were out there wanting to live, wanting to play. And for something like this to happen, it's just devastating. We've gone through kind of all the emotions of anger and rage and mourning, and our sympathies are extended to the families of those children. I can't imagine what they're going through, but this is a huge toll on our very small community and the community in the Golan Heights, especially because of where they're situated. They're almost a forgotten community with their they have a Syrian identity, but they've also been within the Israeli borders for decades. You can probably speak to what the families have been experiencing because you've been there and you have friends.
It's devastating. You have to understand Majd al-Shams, where all of this terrific incident had happened, it's only 11,000 people. And for 11,000 people to lose 12 little kids, innocent kids, in one day, in a blink of an eye, just they went to play soccer. This is what they wanted to do. Despite the 10,000 rockets that had fallen into the northern Israel since October 7th. But they need some sense of normal life to experience, especially now it's a summer, summer vacation, and they have nothing to do. Almost everywhere in the north is closed. They don't have any attractions open anymore. So playing soccer, sending your kid to play soccer and just disappearing in 1 minute, it's devastating. These communities are in the middle, because they are, on one hand, according to the international law, they are Syrians still. And according to us in Israel, we don't care. They are just part of us, part of our community. If you saw the amount of empathy from everyone in Israel, whether Jewish, Christian, Arab, Druze, the whole country is mourning. And I believe and I know that the whole Druze community worldwide is mourning now. It's the obvious translation of what evil can do, because there are no bases, no military bases there. There are no soldiers there. There are just citizens.
So Hezbollah refuses to take responsibility over the attack. They claim that it was not their rocket. Israel shows images of proof that it was their rocket. I guess maybe the Lebanese or the Jordanians will say, well, even if it is Hezbollah's, it was an attack. It was an accident. It wasn't a purposeful attack. I guess I'm really trying to discern the narrative here. But what, at the end of the day, what is your explanation of what is going on there?
Marissa, they also denied October 7th. Terrorists filmed this with their own cameras and put it on their own social media, and people denied it. Now, let me be clear. It is Hezbollah. They admitted before, like few minutes before this atrocity had happened, they admitted that they launched a rocket. And then when they knew that it killed kids, they denied it. And we all know that this rocket, Falak 1, is Iranian. Israel doesn't have this rocket anyway. Iron Dome doesn't have 50 kilograms of explosives. And you know that there is a kid that hadn't been buried because they didn't find his remains. So it's very devastating. I have to tell you, from my experience, I was so angry the first day. Even I didn't feel sad. I felt more anger and rage, because I didn't know how can you do that to kids, knowing there are kids. They know everything. They send their drones and they scan all areas, and they know 100% there are no bases there. Now, to come to my interpretation, maybe they did it on purpose to try to implicate Israel, because now they know that there is a war between Assad and Iranian regime and the Druze in Syria, and Golan Heights are part, according to the international law, of Syrian territory. So I don't know what their means are. I can't even get into this devilish mind, but I think they knew, and now they're ignoring. Not because they feel bad about what had happened. Maybe they have strategical reason why they ignore. And today I was reading that Lebanon had asked Israel to hit only Hezbollah sites, because they said it, they admitted, they said, because Hezbollah has very specific targets towards Israel. So what are you trying to tell me? That this was a very specific target that Hezbollah hit?
So you're saying the Lebanese are aware of the fact that Hezbollah knows what they're doing, and that's why the Lebanese are saying to Israel, if Israel is retaliating back, to be careful, or if Israel's retaliating back, to be careful and only retaliate against Hezbollah in particular.
Yeah, they asked not to hit Beirut because Hezbollah has specific targets in Israel that they hit. So now I ask myself, so was this soccer field a specific target for Hezbollah to hit? This is what I understand from what they are saying. And by the way, let's not forget that there are 10,000 rockets that Hezbollah had launched since October 7th. Why now, when it hits, it's not ours? Who fires rockets from that area? Who neighbors us? Who? Stockholm? Sweden? We have only one neighbor from that area that fires rockets constantly against Israel, which is Hezbollah from Lebanon. That's the only entity.
Yes, and I would also add that it wouldn't be the first time that Hezbollah has directly attacked the Druze community. In
Really?
2008, essentially, Hezbollah turned its weapons inwards towards its own countrymen and took over Beirut for a period of time and attacked the villages in the foothills and also the Shuf. They were held back because villagers were defending their towns. And the Druze, I should say that over the centuries, they haven't been this helpless little minority. And I think that possibly one of the reasons why Hezbollah doesn't want to take responsibility for it is because there would be a problem with the Druze community in Lebanon. And it would muddy the situation there a little bit. We had the experience in 2008, and something like this happening in a recurrent way would affect their situation there. So we don't have those international agencies backing us, or like you said, the Vatican, but we have we're almost sovereigns in our own little towns, and have a tremendous sense of faith that if one of us were to perish, we will come back.
Yeah.
And that our souls are immortal. We're not going anywhere.
I have this vision of Druze as incredibly self-reliant people as well. I know that you defend yourselves, you grow your own food, you help one another. And so I can definitely see what you're saying in that it's not that you're a helpless minority, but with that said, certainly in this small town that has been attacked, it's a very tricky situation because the Syrians keep vowing that they will take back that land, and ultimately the Druze community will be part of Syria. But meanwhile, and probably in the near future, certainly, and maybe in the entire future, the people who live there are under Israel. And so if you're in this kind of secret religion, but it's no secret that you're Druze and you're living there, you almost have to figure out how do you plot your next few years of existence when you're sitting in this tricky spot. And I know that has been an issue for the Israeli Druze living in the north, which has not been the same thing for Israeli Druze living throughout the country. Is that right?
Yes, we have to understand Israeli Druze live in the north, in northern Israel. But if you go more to the Golan Heights, there are a group of Druze, they are around like 20,000, that they are still considered as Syrian according to the international law. These Druze, Syrian Druze, they can't admit whether they are Israelis or they are Syrian because they don't know what's going to happen in the next few years. So they are just preserving their own identity as Druze. This is their strongest identity. For us as Druze Israeli, our identity is a bond between being Israeli and being Druze. We are not ashamed of it. We say it, we declare it. For Omar, he's a Lebanese Druze. For any Syrian Druze, he's a Syrian Druze. For the Golan Heights people, it's a very sensitive matter because they don't know when they're going to go back to Syria. They have relatives there in Syria that they still live there. They don't know if whether Israel is going to, claim this area internationally. So they are in a very sensitive matter.
Very tough.
Yeah, very tough.
So I want to talk about a couple of positive things. One positive thing is that every Druze woman I know is an intellectual. How is that?
You know that the Druze, right, and like for 2024, the Druze women surpassed the Jewish women in education. They are in the highest level of education in the whole Israel. So I know that according to our religion, woman has to be either equally educated to men or more educated to men. And it's his duty to fund her education if she doesn't have the ability to fund her education. So education is part of our religion that I can't talk about. And I see that in our community now. The women are way more educated than men. Sorry, Omar, it's not
That applies to my family too.
Lydia, 100%.
And yes.
Yeah.
That's true.
Incredible. So we started the episode by just this kismet situation that we've come together, that we all met, that we became friends. Sadly, we come together today to mourn the loss of your community. But I think that none of this could have happened if it wasn't for the United States of America. Anybody who knows me knows that I just adore my country, and which is why I wake up every single day asking myself, what have I done to fight for the United States of America? And so this is another one of those examples where I don't think we could have had this conversation anywhere. And I think that we are taking advantage of it in the best way possible. But just let's talk a little bit about what it's like to be here as Americans. What is it like to be an American Druze?
This is a really special occasion, and I would want to meet more of your relatives who are here and understand the experience that you've had on the other side of the border. And so for you also to understand what we learned growing up. And I did spend 10 years in Lebanon at an international school, and I always had these conceptions of what what was going on the other side of the border, and it took some time being in the United States to see that other perspective. And so I think a lot could be said about just getting together and having a conversation. I think of kind of a microcosm of what happened during the Lebanese Civil War. There was, the Israelis, I think it was 26 foreign armies were involved in that conflict, and at a certain point, the IDF was in the country, and they were going through Druze towns, and there was an exchange of ideas, and there were interactions that you wouldn't expect. You wouldn't expect that weapons were dropped. And it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? And I think that nuance was missed by a lot of the players in that region, where if you look back into the history, there are points that you can draw inspiration from and create the kind of future that a lot of the families they want the simple things. They want their kids to be running around soccer fields and having a good time. A league of children from every walk. That's really what all the people want there. So, it's special that we can have this in the United States, but I hope that the United States is not the only place we can have these conversations.
It's so interesting that we come here together in the United States, and the two of you are starting to think about all of these things that you've learned from your different experiences in the Middle East, right? Your experience in Israel as a Druze in the Middle East, your experience in Lebanon in the Middle East. You went to school there for a while, right? And so you've heard all kinds of things about Israel, Israeli Druze. I'm just so curious about what's going through your mind right now when all of the truth pieces are coming together.
So growing up in Lebanon, I went to a number of different schools. Some of them were away from the metropolitan center of Beirut. I ended up at an international school where other viewpoints were accepted. But I did spend a few years at a school where essentially you see the Star of David, and you immediately the visceral reaction you would get as a result of the education, but it's also the culture. It's a result of the experience of the Civil War. The Civil War of Lebanon ended with Israel being listed as an enemy state. So it would be very hard for someone to go through not only schooling, but just growing up in Lebanon without seeing the flag of Israel, and it would be very hard for them not to react in a negative way. So the journey to go from there to understanding I'm going to try to connect the dots, but when we took World War II lessons at the international school, we had a teacher from Texas who was wonderful in the way she framed things. And I thought, if you were Jewish at the end of World War II, what are you to do? What was the alternative? The U.S. wasn't exactly the most, it wasn't the least anti-Semitic place in the world. I think it took several years before the U.S. even came to declare war against Hitler. And there are other places that I heard about, which are like Uganda and Argentina. But then there's also this continuous presence of the Jewish community, no matter how much they deny. I mean, I went to Damascus. There was a second century Jewish synagogue there. And Damascus has been continuously populated for a very long time. There's a Jewish community that never ceased to exist in and around Jerusalem. It happened. The UN backed the establishment of a Jewish state, and I think that the world, just like especially that part of the world, needs to get rid of the idea that the Jews are going to get pushed into the sea. It's not going to happen. As a member of a minority, even if just any kind of human, the right to exist as a community is enshrined. It's a God-given right. You can't just be eradicated. You have the right to persist. Does it need to happen at the expense of someone else? It shouldn't.
Rania, any thoughts?
Well, I grew up in Israel, but I speak Arabic, as you know. And when I was little, I used to watch Arabic channels because that's what we had back then. I used to watch Lebanese channel, Syrian channel, and Jordanian. And I was just a little kid. I was listening to all of the, for them, it was the truth, the absolute truth. But for me, it didn't align with my reality. Everything that they were saying about Israel, it didn't align perfectly with what I'm experiencing as a kid. And I didn't know how to explain this. That's when I grew up, I wanted to really be, investigate it more in depth. And then at some specific age, I wanted to learn politics sciences and started to be exposed to the history books that they teach in Arab world and the brainwashing, the constant brainwashing. And I saw that also the Druze community is not immune. It's part, I think we are like a collateral damage of what is happening in the Middle East because we are minorities. We live in different places. So we are fed with the culture that we are in. And as a kid or as a young person after that, seeing all of this bias and brainwashing didn't feel good to me. Like when they were talking about Israel as an apartheid, it didn't feel good to me. But I can't blame a Druze person, and now I'm focusing on the Druze community. I can't blame a Druze person who were born and raised in Lebanon or in Syria, and we're taught that Israel is an apartheid, that there are no legal equal rights towards the Arabs and the minorities in Israel. I can't blame them and blame how they think about Israel, but I know that as a human being, when you go outside of this brainwashing, depressing, and oppressing culture, and you face the truth and the facts, it's upon your humanity and your logic to balance the facts that you have and to decide which true.
It's especially interesting when you come from the United States, and so you already have a culture and a mentality of freedom, and then you go into the Middle East, and then you have the experience there. In some ways, like what you're saying, when you're able to live in a duality, you're able to at least compare. But if you're living under a certain thumb with a certain message that controls everything, it's much harder to have that ability to discern and essentially not become a Jew hater if all you're being told all the time is that Jews are horrible people. Or, that's the problem with Marxism and socialism. And now we're seeing Islamism is there is no room for an additional perspective. Any additional perspective will be then punished. And so I'd imagine, like you said, it's very difficult for Druze who are very peace-loving people to grow up in places around the world, or especially in the Middle East, if they're so subject to a very, very narrow narrative. It's difficult to be able to have that discernment that both of you have when you come and go in and out of the Middle East and into the West and kind of put the pieces together and have the freedom of thought, right? And that ability to liberate your mind from what you're expected to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's probably the calculus that members of the leadership in Lebanon, maybe around the time of the end of the Second World War, they cast their lot with the socialists. They didn't know if the West was actually going to be what it became, and the Druze community in Lebanon after the 40s and 50s largely went down the socialist track, And I think that leadership bet on the wrong horse. I think they bet on the wrong horse. They were sending young Druze men to the Soviet Union to get their education, their military training. And it led us to what we have in Lebanon today. That kind of movement, the Lebanese national movement, was one of the reasons why Lebanon descended into civil war. They had a fair share of reservations about the way the system was in Lebanon, but turning the country into the most chaotic place in the world for 15 years destroyed its potential. And I think that the bet that socialism was going to deliver Lebanon to a better place was totally faulty and a mistake on the part of the leadership at the time. So the currency has lost 98% of its value over the last 2 years. I think it's the worst financial crisis of any nation in the last 150 years. It makes the Argentine currency look like the petrodollar at its prime. That's how bad the financial crisis in Lebanon is. And what I see is from the 1940s until the last few years, where Druze families were being handed chicks to grow chickens and have their eggs at home. That's the final genesis of that philosophy, which is that you are signing up for poverty if you go down that route. And it could have been cloaked in socialism, but it really was down the path towards communism and getting rid of whatever it is that you owned. And it's really just a sad outcome for that community and the country, not just the Druze community in Lebanon. It's just a really sad outcome. You have an A/B test. Israel's not a perfect state. There are a lot of mistakes that it made in the Lebanese civil war. There was several opportunities to understand the nuances and create a better outcome, and it left a sour taste amidst the whole Lebanese population. It could have done things differently. But I think with fresh leadership, there's always an opportunity to make things better and learn from past mistakes. So on the positive side, I think that there's a lot of things in common across the border. I think we can all probably agree that the fact that we're descendants of the Abrahamic religions, the opening to the Paris Olympics was probably revolting to all of us. We all need sustainable energy. Israel has pioneered solar water heating. If you look at the rooftops in Beirut and Damascus, they all have the same sort of technology on the rooftops, and that brings about energy independence. Distributed energy to people makes it possible for them to live a more independent, self-reliant existence, and political leadership doesn't have as much sway over their destiny. So that's been a positive development in Lebanon, and that technology is across the border, across the world. Although fossil fuels still need to be used. That's baseline power, and it's very important. But there are a lot of things that are in common that we need to build on.
I'm so curious, when you say that you went to school in Lebanon for a few years, what were you taught about Israeli Druze? Were you taught that they have the freedom, that they're the most educated in the country? Did you know about how their lives were?
None of that. In fact, it was all one big, that's the Jewish state, and there was a lot of damage to Lebanese infrastructure. I have to say this, that took place throughout the war, but during the country was bombed, and it left a scar, and an understandable scar. Even recently in 2006, there were, I think, 70 or 80 bridges throughout Lebanon that were destroyed. Did every last bridge have to be destroyed? I think that understanding the nuances of and all the complexities and all the small communities that really just want to live, I think that's a good approach from leadership to win hearts and minds, and I think that can happen in both directions. I think it took some overcoming a lot of the education to free myself of any negative feelings towards. It doesn't really serve you if you carry hate in your heart.
Yeah,
it doesn't serve you. You can't reach a resolution. And I'm part of a community that does not. its compelling future is not bringing a whole community or a nation down. It's to upbuild, it's to elevate, it's to live our full life. It's not, we don't have children that whose highest goal is to become martyrs.
Rania, any final message to the world? You're a mom of 2 boys. You're raising them here in America. You have a chance to send a message to all of us.
Yeah, definitely. When I came to the USA, I just worshipped this freedom. And as a woman that came from Israel, it wasn't of any difference. It was so similar to my culture. But when I came here and became an American citizen, I had this duty toward the USA as well. And I have to admit it, that since if you would meet me before October 7th, you would see a housewife that is trying to be a realtor. This is what was it. But since October 7th, I saw that the danger that we are facing in both the Middle East and in Israel is going to come here at some point if we don't do something. And you know me now, I'm a person that I don't wait for others to do the job. I should do whatever I can to make the change that I desire, not only for me, for my children. I don't want my children to grow in a place where they are silenced because of their belief. I want them to grow proud of who they are, no matter what they believe in. And at the same point, I want also to let them respect others and their beliefs. I feel that it's our duty as Druze, because the Druze community had always followed this path, no matter when, no matter how difficult it is. And I think that we are really the example of how you can be a minority, so different, but still to live with any community in the world, whether Israelis or Lebanese or Muslims or Christians or Americans, and still respect and be respected. I wish that people can learn from us how to respect others and not to turn everyone into infidel only because he doesn't carry the same beliefs or ideology. I hope for my kids to be in a better world, a more forgiving, more, the life now is hard, Marissa. We sense it in Israel, we sense it here. And I have to tell you, I'm not really very optimistic, but I have to do whatever I can to change this reality.
Well, I'll end with this. I think that the question of whether we should be optimistic or pessimistic, as Dennis Prager would say, is almost irrelevant when it comes to the fight of good versus evil. All that matters is what the fight is about and that we fight against the evil for the good. And so the optimist may say, well, everything's going to be fine. I don't need to do anything. The pessimist may say, well, everything is crappy. What's the point of even fighting? And so we kind of move the optimism or pessimism conversation aside, and we talk about the reality at hand and the evil that we need to fight. So thank you both for coming in. I know you had to really change your day all around and accommodating with the children, but I think it was a very, very important conversation, and I admire you both, and I appreciate you both. Bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.